Thank you so much. I'd come to this church just for the music, and I know many of you do. That was tremendous. Thank you so much. It fits so well with our message tonight. Thank you for the offertory. Jonathan Fouts. I remember Jonathan when he was eating crayons, and now here he is doing this. I did not know, is Mr. Fouts, Mr. Fouts, where are you? Where'd you go? I didn't know you played the piano. I've known you 25 years. I did not know you played the piano. I heard the piano, I looked over there, and I said, who is that? And my glasses don't work as well as they used to. You kind of have to find that sweet spot, while you're trying to. And that was tremendous. My goodness. What else? What other hidden talent? What are you, a pilot, a nuclear physicist? What else do you do? That was great. We're going to be in John chapter 21. John 21. Had a great week at the ranch. Just want to give you a quick report on that. Had a lot of fun. Took teens to the ranch many, many years as a youth pastor, so I had great memories, wonderful memories of the ranch. And I remember when I first got there was something else going on. I was kind of on my own, so I walked down the athletic fields and walked down by Cowboy Town and hung out in some places I remembered so well, and I couldn't resist it. I called two of the teenagers that were with me back then in my youth department are now pastors, and I called them both and said, hey, you're not going to guess where I am right now. And these kids were in my youth group and played on sports teams and made decisions for Christ there. And we had a lot of fun on the phone just fellowshipping and remembering. Had the great privilege this past week of seeing many, many, many teens accept Christ and make a host of other decisions that will change their life direction. And it was a great week. It really was. I tell you, when I'm here, you're working all the time. There's something going on all the time here. And I was thanking God for something that I didn't expect and I didn't realize would take place. When I got to the ranch, I had some hours in the afternoon to just pray and spend some time reading and thinking. Probably time I would not have had I been here. And I was very grateful for that wonderful time. I told Dr. Bill Rice how much I appreciated the time just to get alone with God for more hours than have been possible in a while. And it was just a great blessing to me. I went down there to be a blessing to them, ended up the one who got the blessing by being there. Let me tell you this, because so many of you invest your lives in PCC students, PCA students, and try to get these young people to follow Christ and give him what talent they have and let him use them in mighty ways. I want to encourage you. The Bill Rice Ranch has 41 full-time staff. 30 of them are PCC grads. And that just thrilled my heart. And they're doing a great job. And they're making a huge difference. And I just wanted you to know your effort and your sweat and the hard work you put in the lives of these young people is paying off. And they are indeed making a difference in this world. John chapter 21. John chapter 21. Let's look at verse 15, 16, and 17. So when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs. He saith to him again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my sheep. He saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, Lovest thou me? And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. Jesus saith unto him, Feed my sheep. General Eisenhower, in his headquarters during World War II, rebuked a fellow general when that general referred to a soldier as just a private. And Eisenhower told him, We could more easily win this war without our generals than without our enlisted men. He's not just a private. Now, we all know the names and the faces and the more famous sermons of great pastors and great evangelists. Some of these men have come here and have preached behind this pulpit. And these are men that have put 40 and 50 years behind pulpits and built great churches and had tremendous revival meetings around the country. We honor these men and we love these men. And it's a thrill to have them here and hear them speak. And we get to hear men that are just icons of the Christian faith. And it's a joy to be able to hear them. But if the gospel is going to reach the everyday man in the streets, it will be proclaimed mainly by the everyday Christian in the pew. If you're a believer, you have been called to be a servant of God. Now, you may not acknowledge that. You may not live up to that calling. You may be struggling in many areas of your Christian life. You may not act like you're a servant of Christ. You may not be living for the Lord, but Jesus has called you into his service. None of his children have not been called. When he saved us, he called us to serve him in some capacity, in some way, to glorify him, to represent him, to speak for him, and to tell men of him. Now let's say, just for the sake of argument, that you believe what I just said. How and where do you begin to express a life of service? Where does it start? I have even stood here and told you that on a certain night in Bristol, Tennessee, in an old open place in the grass, I gave my life to Christ for service. And sometimes when people give you illustrations like that, you think, well, I haven't had that experience. So maybe I have not been called, but the fact of the matter is that God's called all of us that have been to Calvary into his service. Now, John 21, 15, and 17 reveals a crucial ingredient that Christ requires of all of his servants, and it is therefore the starting point of service. He looked at Peter and said, "Do you love me?" I want to share two things with you tonight: the condition for service and the commission for service. 3 times in these verses, once each verse, Christ commissioned Peter for service. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. But each time he did that, he preceded the commission with a question: lovest thou me? More than anything else, Christ desired that Peter love him. Without that crucial ingredient, he was unfit for service. He made the comment to him in verse 15. Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? Well, what did he mean by these? What did the question actually entail? Well, it could have been several things. Let's look at least 3. 1, he could have meant, do you love me more than these other disciples? Because, as you know, Peter had jumped ship and swam back to shore and beat the rest of them there. And he and the Lord had a little breakfast together. But by then, you know, the rest of them are arriving. Was he pointing at the other apostles and disciples arriving, saying, do you love me more than these? Is he talking about the other men? If he meant that, then he's asking him a question. Do you love me more than your closest friends? Do you love me more than family? Am I the most important thing in your life? Am I more dear to you than any of these? Can you say that? Can you say you love him more than any other person on earth? I love my wife, and men that have been married a long time, you know exactly what I mean when I say this. My wife gets more precious to me by the day. You know, my wife truly is, you guys will tell you, your wife is your best friend. Well, no, come on, sometimes that's just not true. Sometimes there are problems and in-squabbling and don't see things quite like. We're talking about retirement. We're not going to. Don't be concerned about it. Not going to happen. When we talk about retirement, we say, we'll retire. What are you going to do? I tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to move somewhere that has 4 seasons because Florida has 1. Heat. Yeah. My car today, when he left the parking lot heading back home, the inside thermometer there in my car said 100. Good night. I want to go somewhere where there's a real fall. I miss the fall so much. I grew up in Central North Carolina. I haven't seen the fall in 30 years, and I miss the fall. And I love to be where there's a little nip in the air, and you have to wear a jacket and throw a log on the fire and pull the dog a little closer to you. You know. And I throw that out at Connie. Connie said, all I want is some woods to walk in, a real wood fire, not this old mamby-pamby gas thing. I want a real wood fire, maybe a dog. That's it. It's all I want. And what do you want? Connie loves heat. She would move us further south if she could. And we're wrestling back and forth about this, and I'll probably end up now that things are opening up with Cuba, who knows where I'll end up. But the older I get, and the more Connie and I walk this life together, and the more we serve the Lord together, the closer and closer and closer her heart is to me. And I love her dearly, and she is indeed my best friend. But I cannot love her more than Christ. Parents often idolize their children. And it was hard. When my boys left, it was like somebody died. It was hard to let go of your children. But parents idolize their children. And I know many, many parents, if that child were to come to you and say, I believe the Lord is calling me to the mission field, I know parents that would try to talk them out of it. I talk to parents all the time. They'll come down here and bring their children down to come to a camp or come to something here at Pensacola Christian College. And maybe they had me for the DVD program, and we just bump into each other. Oh, I love those DVDs. And I say, well, hey, why don't you allow us to finish the job? Let your son come to college here and let us finish the job that you seem to have enjoyed so much in his life up to this point. And the mom will look at me and say, oh, no, I couldn't do that. That's too far away. And I've looked at moms and said, well, let me ask you this question. I said, what are you going to do if God calls him to Peru or Thailand? What are you going to do then? Yeah, so sometimes parents idolize, do you love me more? If you are hanging on to your child, and listen, you could be a parent right here serving on staff or faculty or a town person right here attending the campus church, and your child comes to you and says, I want to serve the Lord with my life, and you know it means that child leaving you, and if you try to grab onto that child and keep that child from doing what it is the Lord wants him to do, then you're loving that child more than you're loving Christ. Flip the coin over. I know children that are very reluctant to leave their parents. It's amazing to me. I would have never allowed my adult boys to live with me. Number one, they eat way too much. But I wouldn't have allowed them to stay there. You know, my boys were ready to go. They just left. It was a natural thing. It was a normal thing. It's what we expected. It hurt, but it was what should be happening. I couldn't imagine having a 31, 30, 33, 34, 35, 40-year-old son living in my home. That many young people today, they just don't want to leave home. Hang around right there. It's time to go. It's time to branch out. It's time to go do something. It's time to make your mark. It's time to stand up for Christ and be your own man. And many children are reluctant to leave their parents. People are attached to a geographical area more than they are to Christ. I'm a Southern boy. I was born Southern. I was raised Southern. I love the South. I do. Could God call me to Massachusetts? Would I go to Massachusetts if God called me? Well, I'd like to think I'd go anywhere God called me. But some of us are just attached to a geographical location or a country or a hemisphere. And God has a hard time calling you. Think of the great missionaries that are with us today and some of the ones in the past that left and went halfway around the world to serve. They'd never been there. They'd never visited. They didn't have any real clue of the culture. Travel was so difficult in the 1800s, it would have taken you a year to go over to China and come back again. And nobody could afford that or had the time for that. God said, I want you in China. And they said, I'm gone. And they just left where they were and went and knew so little about where they were going, except that it was God's will. And they loved God more than they loved knowledge or comfort, and they left and served Him. Are you more attached to an ethnic or a racial group than you are to Christ? Can God call you to work with a different racial group? If you're of African background, could you work with white people? I mean, could that be your ministry? You're white. Could you work with people of an African background? Could you do that? If you're Caucasian, can you work with Asians? And sometimes we are just so comfortable in our own little cocoon with our own people, with people just like us. It's very difficult for God to call us to work with people that are not like us. But if we love the Lord and we truly do love Him, we love His will, and whatever it is that He calls us to is something we love. And He said that to Peter, do you love me more than these? Could He have been talking about friends and family and comfort and those things that you're used to? All of those, the reluctance in any area, parents to let go of their children, children to leave their parents, people attached to a geographic area, people attached to a racial group and just could not see themselves working outside that racial group. All of that is evidence that we love something greater than we love Christ. Jesus claimed a right to Peter's love. He wouldn't have asked the question, do you love me? Insinuates you should. He's claiming a right to his love. Greater loveth no man than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. Jesus laid down his life. He has shown us the greatest love possible. What makes us think that he deserves less? What makes us think that Christ will accept less? It's assumed if the question were asked, the answer was not clear or obvious. You're working outside in the heat of the day and you're wearing a big hat to keep the sun out of your face, and I walk up to you and say, hey, are you wearing a hat? And you just look at me like, hat? See, when you ask a question, it is assumed that the answer to the question is not obvious. Do you love me, Peter? It was not an obvious thing. What else could he have meant by, do you love me more than these? Well, another possible understanding of the question is, do you love me more than you love these fishing boats and nets? Peter was a fisherman. That's all he'd ever done. And he knew the boats. He could sail. He knew how to throw the nets. He knew how to bring them back in. He knew when to throw the nets. He knew when to fish. He knew where the fish were certain times of day. That was his vocation, and he was very good at it. Could Jesus have been asking him as the fishing boat came closer and closer to shore, do you love me more than this boat, this net, this vocation that you've given yourself to? Are you more dedicated to me than to that vocation? Let me ask you a question. Is your attendance in church a reflection of genuine love and worship? Is your life a reflection of genuine love and worship? Or while you're sitting in church, worshiping? Are you thinking about other things even as you worship, like your job, your responsibilities, your career, where you're headed, what's in the future? Does what we do consume us to the point that we are not really focused on our love for Christ? And it's easy to do, because if we love the Lord, we are given to what we do. And we believe it's our responsibility to love what we do. But there's a danger there. You could love what you do at the expense of your love for the Christ that called you to do it. You know, I loved teaching. I loved teaching. Teaching for me was like breathing. I loved it. I loved the chalk. I loved the dust. I loved young people and questions that didn't matter. Teaching one day in class, and we're talking about the Compromise of 1820 and all the political ramifications of the Compromise of 1820. And a hand goes up in the back. Yes. Did you see the thing on TV about the puppy that got caught in the drain, and they had to come in with a truck and dig a big hole and cut the thing and pull the puppy out? And I looked across the room like, and? This attaches how to this? And I just kept looking like, is that it? And she was done. That was it. Nothing to do with the Compromise of 1820. Just no filter system, you know. Whatever was in there was coming out, you know. And I loved them. They were so much fun. I loved teaching. I loved coaching. Had a lot of fun coaching. Had a great relationship. I'll tell you one thing, coaches are important people. I honestly believe I had a closer relationship with that small group of men than I would have had I just been their youth pastor. Coaching is a very unique dynamic with young men, and I enjoyed it very much. By the way, I also coached girls volleyball and girls softball. So there are some things about coaching I did not enjoy. But you know, I loved it. I got up, and it was great, and I loved being with them, and I loved being in that classroom. I loved studying for class. I loved presenting information. I loved it when they did well, and they succeeded in quizzing and testing, and they grew, and the light bulb turned on, and they understood, and they liked the subject, and they were growing in it and realized the importance of it, and I loved it. I don't teach anymore. Because God called me to do something else. Do you realize that our love for what we do, and many of you believe that a call of God is nothing more than the fact that I love to do this. If I love to do this, that's obviously the call of God, without realizing God just might call you to do something that's beyond you. And it's nothing but hard work, and it's difficult, and God might call you to that. The call of God means I love Him. I don't love the vocation more than Him. I love Him enough to follow Him down whatever path He leads me. Do you love me, Peter, more than you love these boats and these nets? Will you follow me? There's another possible meaning to the question. The question Jesus asked Peter could have had a third meaning. He could have said this: Peter, do you love me more than these other disciples love me? Do you love me more than they love me? Do you love me more than these? Not do you love them more than me, but basically, do you love me more than these disciples love me? Are you the head guy in relation to love of me? Now that would take us back to the night of the arrest of Jesus Christ. Matthew 26:33, Peter boasted, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. But he was. He was offended, and he stood there and cursed and said, I know not the man. He was offended in Christ. What did he say to him? Verse 15, yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. But Peter, of course, changed the word. Jesus said, do you love me more than anything? Do you love me with the same kind of love that the Father has for the Son? Do you love me with perfect love? Do you love me with love that is pure and is godly? And what is Peter's answer? I love you like a friend. I love you like a friend. And sometimes we look at that and say, come on, Peter. But think, what has Peter been through? Where has he been? What's happened in his life? He stood there by that fire that night and totally embarrassed himself. He told the Lord, I will never, all others may be offended in thee, but I will never be offended in thee. And boy, did he blow it on that. So Jesus asked him the question, do you love me more than these other men love me? Or he could have. That may have been the meaning. Could it have been that Peter is humbled by his previous rather wild claims of faithfulness and was because of that afraid to express his love in such exalted terms? I've already done that and I messed up. And I'm almost afraid to say it like that again. It could have been. Sin can keep us from expressing in word or deed the fact that we love him above all things, because when we let people know we love him above all things, they expect you to love him above all things. And if we don't, it's obvious to them that we don't. Is he pulling back? Is he saying, no, I don't love you like that. I love you as a friend, because he's afraid to express the fact that he loves him with that pure, wonderful, perfect love. And I want you to notice something else that Peter did. Peter said nothing about the other disciples. He only speaks for himself. We would do well to follow his example there and only look at ourselves as we evaluate love for Christ. We ought to be very careful not to excuse ourselves by saying, Jesus, I confess that I'm not sure about my love for you. I confess that I'm not sure I can, from the depth of my heart, say that I love you above all things. But look at John. Boy, John, look at him over there. He lies, he cheats, he steals, he neglects. He might have even said he eavesdrops, because John wrote this. John knew the conversation. I'm sure Peter told him. I'm not accusing John of being a nosy man. Well, we do that a lot, don't we? Well, yeah, maybe I don't love you like I should. Maybe I'm not all in, but I'm a lot farther in than that guy is, or that guy. Peter didn't do that. Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. In verse 16, Jesus asked him the second time, lovest thou me? Jesus still uses the word for holy love. Peter still uses the word for friend. In verse 17, Jesus asked the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And this time Peter is grieved at the third question. And we often become impatient and grieved when God demands that we love him more than anything else. Would it irritate you if someone you're supposed to love, your wife, your husband, your child, came to you and said, do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. Did you get irritated when people just keep asking the same question? It grieved him. But you know why it grieved him? Because the third time Jesus used his word. Do you even love me like a friend? And that grieved Peter, because he knew the Lord could see into his heart. It grieves us sometimes when God demands that we love him, and he does, because we want to love other things. We want to love other things as much as we love him, in some cases even more. And it grieves us when God calls to us again and again and again, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Because we're wrestling inside with whether or not we do. I want you to notice that Jesus never asked him if he would serve him. He didn't say, Peter, will you serve me? Peter, will you serve me? He said, Peter, do you love me? Willingness is not the primary requirement for service. Love for Christ is the primary requirement. If your love for Christ is where it should be, willingness will be there. If you do not love Him as you should, that's what's causing you to have a lack of willingness. It is our love for Him that drives us to serve Him, not our willingness. Jesus didn't ask him, and I love this about my Savior, Jesus didn't ask Peter if he was sorry about denying Him. Never brought it up. He didn't say, Peter, remember that night when you denied me? I'm just curious, have you had a change of heart since then? He never brought it up. He said, do you love me? There was no rebuke. There was just love. Does the question make you uncomfortable? Say, I don't like the question. I don't want to get up every single day of my life and answer the question, lovest thou me? I don't want to face it every day. I don't want to wrestle with my own flesh and its desire to love something else. I don't want to have to admit the answer to my own heart because I am not sure of the answer. The whole question makes me uncomfortable. But the answer to the question will determine the direction, the quality, and the usefulness of our lives. And it is foolish to look at an auditorium full of people that are fleshly people and believe that everyone just loves Jesus Christ supremely. We have to work at that every day. We shouldn't have to. It ought to be automatic, but it's not because we're people. And we fall in love with other things, and we fall in love with comfort, and we fall in love with things we want to do, and we fall in love with family, and we fall in love with where we are, and we fall in love with what we're doing. And Jesus comes to us like He came to Peter, and He says, one thing, do you love me? And we don't like the question. And we wrestle with it. And we fight with it. And we don't admit it to other people, but it's there, and our flesh is gnawing at it, and our flesh wants to love other things. And if we love Him supremely, I might have to give up this. I might have to give up that. I might have to go there. I might have to do this. I might have to sacrifice something of the life that I had planned. Do you love me? Every head bowed, every eye closed just for a moment.